How do you select a topic to investigate in the form of a symbolic breakdown?
I kind of have these categories in my mind that I want to talk about, things that I want to talk about, and I almost have certain steps where I know that I can't talk about this. There's some things I can't talk about yet because I have to talk about this and I have to talk about that. Okay. I kind of have to build up with certain things, and so then what I'll end up doing is once I'm in a certain area talking about a certain thing, then I'll try to choose things which are connected to that. Like a good example was, for example, I think you saw those videos on the principalities, right? So those, I've been waiting a long time to talk about that because I was afraid to talk about it. Because I knew that if I talk about principalities, people are going to think, okay, wacky guy who believes in men with wings that fly around, and because the idea that we have of angels or of gods or principalities is so lame that I was like, I need to build up to that. Like I need to gain people's trust so that when I talk about principalities, they'll know that I'm not spouting nonsense. And so then when I finally arrive there, then I put out 4 or 5 videos that are connected to that.
But your format is that you take something from the common sphere, you take something from pop culture, or just something from our culture.
Well, I do a mix. Like there's one aspect what I'm doing, which is I want to go to the traditional stories.
Yes.
So I'll interpret something from the Bible, or like recently I did one of the Arthurian romances. And so I want to do more traditional symbolism. But the thing is that I don't want people to think that this is some weird esoteric thing, that is just for stories in the past. I want them to understand that although I do believe that, let's say, the stories in the Bible or the ancient myths are more profound than the modern stories, they're still using the same patterns.
Okay.
And so I have one aspect which is talking about the ancient stories, ancient symbolism in icons, symbolism in church architecture, all that. And then another aspect which is, okay, now let's talk about a pop movie or a cultural phenomena and show that the same patterns apply to both sides.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of been I kind of go back and forth between the two.
Yeah. And they feed off of one another.
Exactly. That's the whole idea. And it's also, in a way, the popular one, like let's say I make an interpretation of a popular movie, it's also to, you could say, attract people who wouldn't have been interested in the deeper symbolism at first glance. But then when they see that, it applies to something that I like, it applies to something that I care about, then they might be a bit more willing to say, okay, well, all these these stories that I was told were stupid, and we're just superstitious or whatever, I'm willing to give them a second look.
Okay. So you said that the biblical or the ancient myths are more profound than the current myths.
Yeah.
What makes them profound? Is it because they're simple, or is it because they're old, or is it because they lasted? Is there some sort of evolutionary robustness that caused them to perpetuate and that proved their profundity? Or?
I think for sure there's part of that. This notion that the survival of a story over long periods of time acts as a proof that it has deep meaning. And I think that also I think that one of the problems that we have now is that we have a weird inverted vision of the world, whereas pretty much all of ancient time and pretty much every traditional culture always wanted to link whatever they were doing to the past. So there was this idea that you're always stacking up on something which is already there.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening too is that there was this little refinements, and simplification and refinement happened as these stories are told and retold until and when someone adds something, let's say, to the corpus or to the story, it kind of it clicks. And people will say, "Oh yeah, that's part of it."
Yeah.
And then it continues to do that. So you see that happen. Let's say, right now, you can see it like in comic book characters, where you have a character like Batman, and then at first he's very simple, and as it grows, things will be added, and then sometimes there's too much, and then they'll be removed, and he'll be pruned someone will take certain elements, bring them back, and then some versions of Batman will resonate really strongly, and those that kind of survive and continue, they often end up being the ones that have the most meaning. And so I think that that's how the ancient stories develop. It's just that in our world, we have this weird desire to kind of innovate to innovate, you know? And I think that that's detrimental to the power that the ancient stories have.
You brought up something in your talk that you gave today about innovation for innovation's sake, and you brought up I believe that you brought up a Greek term,
Acedia. Yeah, acedia, which is in the church it's identified as a passion, as something which can a desire in you that can lead you towards sin, that can lead you towards kind of fallen behavior, and you
link that to like some sort of just stimulus. We're looking for the new just to fulfill ourselves, to make us feel alive. It's like this air freshener thing that we pump into the air.
Yeah, exactly. It's a form of acedia is a kind of irascible feeling. You know that feeling when you're bored, or it's like I'm tired of something. I want change. Yeah. You don't totally know why, but the monks identified it clearly because of their ascetic practice. They call it the noonday demon, right?
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the noonday demon?
Okay, this is the English word noon day.
Right. How do you say it? And in French we say the démon du midi.
Okay.
The demon of noon.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it's the demon that in the middle of the day, you've gone through all the things you're going to do, and in the middle of the day you start to feel antsy. In French, we associate it with the middle-aged guy who dumps his wife and gets a young girlfriend.
Okay. Yeah. Right in the middle of the day. Of his
right.
Life.
So when he comes to the middle of his life, it's like he becomes impatient, he becomes irascible, and he wants novelty, and he goes for novelty. And so that's seen as something which was very destructive to the person. And rather to persevere and to stay attached to persevere through the noonday demon is fruitful.
Okay.
Right? Because it'll then give you insights that you hadn't seen before. About your situation, about life, about stories, about all of this.
Okay.
Instead of becoming impatient and wanting something new, you'll always. The thing is that what you want that's new is like you have the desires on your surface, right? You have these desires, and so if you're constantly in the new, you're just feeding the edge of yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
And it always ends up being the same. You fall in these weird cycles where you're always kind of feeding the same these same patterns and passions. But if you stick through it, then you encounter insights that you hadn't thought of before.
Well, on one level, you're simply sating that which is insatiable about you and feeding that which is just hungry. Right. So that just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So you get further and further away from satiation. But beyond that is like a deeper digestion of what is already in your metaphor.
And you see it like the best example is really the guy who just strings girlfriend after girlfriend. Yeah. And it never kind of pans out. And what ends up happening is he just keeps repeating the same cycle. Like the same thing ends up happening, and whatever reason he breaks up with the one girl ends up being secretly the reason why he keeps just breaking up with all these other girls.
Okay.
And so if he had, at some point you're ruined. I'm sorry. At some point you can't. It'd be very difficult to go back. But if you push through in a relationship, for example, if you push through that first irascible moment, then you discover something about yourself, about how you're in a relationship, about the other person, that is far more profound. Yeah. And it's the same. So it's the same with these stories. Yeah. It's like the fact that people have somehow just gotten bored with the ancient stories, and they want and so they think that somehow they're going to get something more from manga or from comics or from this. It shows that there's something lacking in their capacity to go deep into the story.
Well, I think that there's a danger here of confusing the form for the content. It doesn't matter if the story is truly profound, it will survive its translation to any medium. The medium is secondary to the spirit of the story, or like that the seed of the story. Like the Tower of Babel myth can be translated into a tweet, it can be made a comic book, a cartoon, it can be turned into a Transformer cartoon, it can be made a big epic movie, but by Darren Aronofsky or something like that, right? but the story itself, is actually rounded out or smoothed over, built upon by going through all these different
I agree.
changes.
I agree. What I'm referring to is rather this idea that this old story is useless, and now we need we're looking at these new stories. We want new stories just for their novelty. That to me is the problem.
I just wonder if it's possible to make a new story, like with regards to. I think that there is a seed of truth to the need for a diversification of representation in Hollywood. Like let's show more people with different facial structures and skin structures. That's the whole thing. But that can never be a story in and of itself. You can't just swap out the gender of like this 4-man crew that goes around and eats up ghosts and expect that to be in and of itself
interesting.
The interesting bit. So I think that in our marketing kind of driven society or ad driven society, we are conditioned to be attracted to the new, but that ends up being not even the same old thing, just the same bad thing. There's a quote by Northrop Frye, and he's quoting the Jewish tradition. He says that the fool is the man with the new idea that turns out to be the old fallacy.
Right.
So here's the new idea, and a lot of the things. So I'm just trying to make a distinction that, just trying to be careful when we're critiquing that which is new, that there's a good new and there's a bad new. Like there's a renewal aspect of these old things that proves them to be consequent in our time, which is the project that you're participating in and that other people in your wheelhouse with Jordan and other people, you're bringing this up. And so you're speaking it again in a new situation with new context and stuff. But you're proving it because of the resonant properties of that thing that forms in the moment.
No, I agree. I totally agree. I think maybe the attitude that I'm referring to is the kind of the revolutionary tendency, right? This tendency to say out with the old, in with the new. What was interesting, like in Zizek, when he was talking to Jordan Peterson, he said this thing right on the fly at some point where he said something about how like ancient wisdom and ancient things, like there's nothing to get from it, and it's like it's all useless.
Did he say that?
Yeah. I was like, I wasn't surprised that he would say something like that. Okay. I mean, it's not an uncommon thought. It's not an uncommon way of thinking. But I think that there's something.
So that attitude, if we can isolate that attitude,
like I would call it just a revolutionary attitude.
Is it the hope that there's something better in the now that's never been?
And also, I think it's progressivism in general. The idea that somehow society progresses like technology progresses. So we see technology in the.
We emerge out of ignorance into a new knowledge.
And so you hear it all the time. People talk about the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and how people and I get these comments on my YouTube page all the time where all those people were just ignorant. They were just stupid. Not even just ignorant, but stupid, as if they were dumber than we are. But that's an interesting. It's a really interesting. It is the. This is something that I've been thinking about.
And it's usually people who know nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That's hilarious. Right. No, it's true. But it is something that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of... Because one of the things that we've seen that has become clear, for example, in terms of how conservatives tend to dehumanize, okay? So conservatives tend to dehumanize people in terms of space. So they'll say, people that are in my outside group, they're lesser than we are. Right, and that can go pretty far, where at some point we don't even recognize, let's say, the humanity of someone who is from the outside. And we saw, horrible examples of that during colonization and then also during the 20th century. Okay. Now, what I've realized is that progressive people do the exact same thing, but they do it in time. They don't do it in space. Oh, okay. They say that which came before me is less than me. Right? And the evolutionary narrative fits with that, because it's like they were apes. And so the people in the Middle Ages were closer to apes than we are. And the people even just 10 years ago were closer to apes than we are. So there's this weird idea that we're somehow moving towards this point of enlightenment or whatever, and that people who were behind us are less human than we are. And it's interesting because you hear sometimes even the language that people use, barbarian, all that. That's how people spoke. Yeah.
Okay.
Barbarian is the good word because that's how people used to talk about the outsiders, right? So the Romans are civilized, but all those outside are barbarians. Now it's like those people in the Middle Ages were barbarians, and now we are civilized.
There's this quote from Ulysses by James Joyce where Stephen says, "History is the nightmare from which I'm trying to awake." And I played with that term, and in the progressive mindset, history is the nightmare from which I'm trying to prove my virtue.
Right.
I'm using all of that became before to make this signal that I have arrived.
Right.
That's right. Myself. But it's a cheap shot, and I find it intellectually abhorrent.
Yeah.
I've seen that at the colleges and the college mindset that I've seen with the kids when I was at college and I was surrounded by 20-year-olds and I was a 33-year-old, where they would apply their morality right now to, say, colonialism,
right,
like colonialist times. And I would try to challenge them because we would study all the evils that happened in colonial times.
Right.
But for one example, I tried to propose, okay, this European, let's say Britain. Britain went out and they organized the world, and now they did some bad things in their organization. But that same mindset is the same mindset that allowed them to compose a symphony or to assemble incredibly complex amounts of order. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to be able to look back in history and identify the problems, but also realize that those problems only occurred because people had already survived through previous difficulties, or they had. I think that I'm still kind of progressive in a way and innovative in a way. So I think that there's this interplay between tradition and innovation is meaningless without tradition, and tradition is dead.
Yeah, the way that we see it, like let's say in the Orthodox tradition, the way that we see it is that it's different from the way that Jordan Peterson presents it. Like the idea that tradition is not a set of rules or a set of systems. Tradition is, you could call it your connection to those that came before you, that which is handed down to you.
Yeah.
And so the handed down is not just things, it's also a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world, a way, let's say the invisible criteria that makes us human, like the connection that all these.
They came from your parents, they came from their parents, they came from their parents, they came from their parents.
Because most of what we learn almost not rationally.
Yeah.
We learn through example, through connection, through that. And so that is actually also, that is what kind of tradition is. Mm-hmm. When we talk about tradition, we talk about, they call it the mind of the fathers. You need to acquire the mind of the fathers because you need to know how to look at the world. That's what is kind of brought in. And then, even if you create something that's new, it will be done in the mind of the fathers. It will be done connected to all these things that have brought us to where we are.
Yeah. Well, and then
it lacks the night. Then it won't have. If it's done properly, it will avoid the totalitarian naivete, because totalitarianism is always naive. Right, it's always like we can do this right. Like we can just set throw everything out, and this time it'll be good. And in the social justice world, you see this same idea. Like you said, it's like all these people behind us were all evil, because they did evil things. But we'll do it right. Like we won't do anything evil. Like then we see that you have just a little bit of power. As soon as you have just a little bit of power, we see exactly what happens.
But at the same time, I think it is important to recognize the failures of those who came before, and that there is progress that has happened. We can't deny that the civil rights movement did amazing things, and we still need to carry on with that project, with refining the traditions, and moving from a tradition that's based in space into a tradition that now can connect with all these other traditions. That's the problem. For sure. Like how do we make a meta tradition that doesn't call out one tradition as something that we need to eradicate, and everything else that we need that has been appropriate.
You need an outsider. You can't. You have to understand that we will always need an outsider, and people who pretend like they don't They always end up
This is
secretly.
interesting.
It secretly comes back. It comes back no matter what. It's like it's the same. I talked with a postmodernist. Very interesting. We were talking about Jacques Derrida and hospitality, and he was and I was saying, oh, I'm interested in the concept of his radical hospitality, like this absolute hospitality that Derrida talks about. And we're talking about this, and then he just like under his breath he says, well, you're not going to have radical hospitality with fascists, and then he continues. It's like, well, there you go. It's like that you always have. You can't avoid it. There's no way
need
out.
the exception to prove it. So I wonder if the concept of a universal outsider or a universal like Satan would be that which we can all pin. Yeah. We can together form that which is other, or will it always have to be another human being? Will that always eventually lead to a dehumanization?
Well, I hope not. I think that.
How do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's hard. I think that in Christianity, what is supposed to happen, it doesn't always happen. What's supposed to happen is that all gets taken into yourself, right? And so all the symbolism of the outsider in Christianity. Father Stephen talked about this evening. The symbolism that you find in the old world about the outsider, which needs to be, let's say, eradicated or needs to be pushed away or cast out or whatever,
kept around as an example,
right? Comes back into Christianity as your passions, as within you, you have that same structure. Yeah. And so that's how it doesn't always play out that way.
No.
But that is at least the let's say the theory, or at least what it's supposed to bring you towards.
Well, okay, this bridges to something that I wanted to talk to you about that you brought up.
Right.
But I did want to, because when I was thinking about this, well, how do I get away from my others? Like, because I have a shadow all the time, and I've been in dialogue with my shadow consciously since I was 20. Like I have very strong long-term relationship, and he's not all bad or anything, but he's my other. And that's how I help from projecting that otherness onto somebody outside of me, because I know that they have an other too. Right. Which could just as easily be attached to me, but if I understand that I am my other, maybe they'll recognize it. Anyways.
Yeah, well, you seem like all the people that are on YouTube, you seem to be doing a pretty good job at that. Because it's not a lot of people are able to do that. You seem to be able to talk with frankness and openness to everybody. Like to all the sides and all the and I think that's, to me, I mean, that's what I really wanted to emulate on my channel too, is to say, even though I do inhabit a position, and I'm not going to pretend, I'm going to be clear, but that I want to be able to kind of talk to anybody. Yeah.
So with that in our heads, like of owning our own other, and for some, identifying our own other as a function or a part of ourselves. You brought up something about social media, and there's a lot of warnings about social media. This is a technology, a tool that is very new, and that our generation didn't have, and then we did. Yeah. Our children are immersed in it. It's not going away. We're experiencing some growing pains. So what you brought up is that we have distilled human relationships into performance. Yeah. So when we go onto Twitter, I am no longer Benjamin. Yeah. I am this Benjamin A. Boyce out there. And when I'm on YouTube, I'm no longer me. I'm this Benjamin. And then when I meet somebody, every once in a while I'll meet somebody who watches my videos, and they're like, there's that moment of like, oh yeah, you are actually a real person, and it takes a few sentences to like get them comfortable, right. because they have this image that's not me. Right. And I think that if we can cultivate an understanding that what we put out in this place is a mask of sorts. It's a medium. It is an other. Right. It's something that's other than us. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that will allow us to build intimacy through like this hopscotch through this medium.
I don't know if it
realm of lights and
I don't know shadows. If it can help. I don't think. It's very difficult to imagine that intimacy can come from social media. Listen.
But we never met in person until we were on YouTube.
Right. Okay. So it is different. Talking on video is not the same as exchanging on Twitter or on Facebook. I don't think it's totally the same, but it is a little bit because we are doing it publicly. So there is something which affects the way that we're talking. Like, we're not going to talk necessarily about the same thing. If I hung out with you for a weekend, we probably would end up talking about things that we were not going to talk about in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is a performative. There's definitely a performative aspect. What I was trying to bring about in terms of social media is that it has the way that it's set up. Like something like Facebook is the best example, because you are posting things about yourself.
Yeah.
So you get to control what people see about you, right? And then people can look at you without you knowing if they want, right? So there's an aspect which is showing yourself, and the other part is consuming, and it is voyeuristic, and so there's a thrill at knowing that you're putting something that you've controlled of yourself out there, and then people are going to see it because it's flattering, whereas real relationships are not like that, right? You can't control the perceptions. You can't control what I see in you when I'm looking at you, when I'm talking to you directly. You can
Depends
try.
on how good of a performer.
That's true, right? Maybe, but you won't. You can. It's true, but it won't be all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And it seems like people who engage in social media and think that this is somehow real life.
Okay.
Then I think it's
so there's a slippage. I firmly believe that we cannot stop us uploading human culture into the virtual space.
No.
I think we're involved in this project.
For sure.
I think we need to do it correctly.
Right.
And I think that it's possible. Maybe it's not possible. I think it's possible for intimacy to form, but it has to form in the right. We need to inject certain aspects of reality that we don't necessarily like to inject, which would be time and space.
Right.
Because everything in social media is kind of too immediate. I think there's certain pressures in social media that limit the intimacy that can form. So I just think that there's possibility for intimacy to form and be maintained, but there's certain things that keep it from being maintained. And I think that it could map onto the concept of the passions. And let's say like a travesty happens, and everybody has a passionate reaction to that travesty. And then that those passions very quickly line up into these interpretations of a travesty. Let's say a shooting with a political connotation to it. And then so the passions are all invested, and then it breaks up into these ideological containers. And then these ideological containers form this pseudo-intimacy within these opinions, and then this drastic this virtual animosity in the battle of those things. So that would be an example of something that's not intimate. And being aware, mindful when that's happening. Yeah, that it's basically giving into the worst mob mentality, giving into the worst idea that we are the good guys. Here's our inside. They're the outside. They're the bad guys. And so here comes the fight. And